No one warned her that the most dangerous moment wouldn't be the night her husband left. It would be the night she realized someone else in the house had been watching her all along. Not to harm her, not to betray her, but to protect her for a reason she didn't yet understand. Have you ever trusted someone so completely that you never imagined they could be keeping something from you? Have you ever been left alone at the exact moment you needed love the most? And what would you do if the person you least expected held the truth that could change everything? Because this isn't just a story about a billionaire, a pregnant wife, or a servant with a secret. It's a story about love under pressure, about silence that hurts more than words, and about how the people who protect us don't always wear power or titles. Before we begin, welcome, whether you're new here or returning. And if you believe stories can teach us something about love, trust, and life, take a moment to subscribe. You won't want to miss how this one unfolds. Now, let me take you back to the moment when everything still felt safe, before the house became too quiet, before the nights grew heavy, before love was tested in ways no one could have prepared for. For Isolde Marin, love had always felt like certainty, not the loud, dramatic kind that demands attention, but the quiet kind that steadies your breath, the kind you could lean on when the world felt uncertain. She believed in loyalty, the way some people believed in fate, without hesitation, without conditions. It was why she stood in the doorway that morning, one hand resting gently over her growing belly, watching her husband close his suitcase. Alaric Rowe moved with the same calm precision he carried everywhere. Even in something as ordinary as packing, there was intention in every motion. Folded shirts, a neatly placed watch, shoes aligned perfectly at the bottom of the case. He was used to control, used to responsibility, used to carrying the weight of decisions that affected thousands of people. What he wasn't used to was leaving his pregnant wife behind. "You'll call when you land," Isolde said softly. Alaric looked up immediately, his expression warming the moment their eyes met. He crossed the room and rested his hand over hers, right where their child moved quietly beneath her skin. "Of course," he said, "and every night after that." He leaned in, pressing his forehead to hers, not rushed, not distracted, just present. It was the same way he'd always been with her, long before his name carried headlines and numbers that no longer felt real. To the world, Alaric Rowe was a self-made billionaire, a man whose decisions moved markets, whose signature closed deals worth more than most people would earn in a lifetime. People admired his discipline, his composure, the way nothing ever seemed to shake him. But to Isolde, he was the man who listened, the man who noticed when her voice changed, even slightly, the man who remembered how she took her tea, the man who once stayed up all night just to talk through her worries when she doubted herself. She hadn't fallen in love with his ambition. She'd fallen in love with his attention. They had met years earlier, when success was still something he chased rather than carried. Back then, Alaric worked late nights in a cramped office, building something from nothing. Isolde had seen him tired, frustrated, uncertain, and she had loved him anyway. Their relationship had grown in quiet moments, shared meals after long days, walks that stretched longer than planned, conversations about values, not money, about peace, not power. When they married, it didn't feel like a celebration for others to admire. It felt like a promise. And when Isolde found out she was pregnant, that promise seemed to deepen. Alaric changed in ways she hadn't expected. He lingered longer in the mornings, checked in more often during the day. Sometimes she'd catch him talking softly to her belly when he thought she was asleep, speaking about the future, about the kind of father he hoped to be. For a while, she believed this season would be their happiest. Then the call came. An overseas expansion. A final negotiation. One trip that couldn't be delayed without risking everything he'd worked for. Alaric explained it carefully, reassuring her that it was temporary. Just a few weeks, he said, long enough to secure stability, long enough to ensure their child would never lack anything. Isolde nodded. She trusted him. She always had. But trust doesn't stop the quiet tightening in your chest when goodbye comes sooner than expected. As the car pulled away, Isolde remained standing in the doorway long after it disappeared down the drive. The estate felt larger, suddenly, emptier, as if the walls themselves noticed his absence. That was the first night the house felt too quiet. The staff moved, as they always did, efficient, respectful, careful not to intrude. Yet there was one presence that seemed more noticeable now than before. Kalen. He had been with the household for years, long before the expansions, long before the increased security. He wasn't loud or imposing. He didn't overstep. He simply did his job precisely, attentively, maybe too attentively. Isolde noticed it in small moments, the way he seemed to appear just when she needed assistance, the way his eyes followed her carefully when she moved too quickly, the way he subtly adjusted his pace to stay nearby without being obvious. It wasn't uncomfortable, just usual. One afternoon, sunlight poured through the tall windows as Isolde stood from her chair too quickly. A wave of dizziness caught her off guard, and she reached for the armrest instinctively. Kalen was there instantly. "Please," he said gently, offering support without touching her until she nodded. "You should sit." She smiled, a little embarrassed. "I'm all right. Just tired." He didn't argue. He simply ensured she was settled before stepping back, his posture respectful, his attention unwavering. From that day on, she noticed more. Rooms prepared before she asked. Lights adjusted without comment. Late-night footsteps that paused outside her door, never entering, never disturbing. Oh, something else. A quiet tension whenever Alaric called. Wasn't suspicion yet, just awareness Then came the evening that changed everything. Rain tapped softly against the windows as Isolde sat alone, wrapped in a shawl, scrolling through photos of happier moments. Beaches, laughter, hands intertwined. Her phone buzzed with a message from Alaric. Meetings running long. I'll call later. I love you, she replied with reassurance she wasn't entirely sure she felt. That was when she heard voices. Low, urgent. They came from near Alaric's private study. A room few entered without permission. Curiosity drew her closer, her steps quiet against the polished floor. Kalen stood just outside the door, speaking into his phone. She doesn't know, he said, and it's better that way. For now. Isolde stopped cold. Her heart pounded. I'm watching everything, Kalen continued. Nothing will happen to her. I promised. Promised? She stepped back just as he ended the call and turned. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither spoke. Is everything all right? She asked softly. He hesitated, just a fraction too long. Yes, he said, everything is under control. That night, sleep refused to come. Isolde lay awake, one hand over her belly, thoughts racing. Who had he promised? What didn't she know? And why did protection suddenly feel so close to danger? I'll protect you, she whispered to her child. No matter what. She didn't know then how deeply that promise would be tested, or how closely the truth had been standing beside her all along. Morning arrived, softly, as if the house itself was trying not to disturb her. Isolde woke to pale light filtering through the curtains, her body heavy with the kind of tiredness that sleep never seemed to fix. She lay still for a moment, one hand resting over her belly, waiting for the familiar reassurance of movement. When it came, a gentle flutter, she exhaled slowly. You're awake too, she murmured, a faint smile touching her lips. This had become her routine since Alaric left. Quiet conversations meant for no one else. Small reassurances whispered into the silence. It was her way of holding on to connection when the house felt too empty. She sat up carefully, the memory of the previous night still lingering at the edges of her thoughts. She doesn't know. I promised. The words echoed again, unwelcome and unresolved. Isolde pushed them aside as she dressed, reminding herself that uncertainty didn't mean danger. She had lived long enough to know that not every unanswered question carried bad intentions. Still, something about Kalen's tone unsettled her. Not fear, exactly, but awareness. As if something important was moving around her without her consent. Downstairs, breakfast waited neatly arranged. Fresh fruit, warm tea, everything exactly as she liked it. Good morning, Mrs. Rowe, Kalen said, his voice calm, respectful. Good morning, she replied, studying him more closely than usual. He looked the same as always. Composed, attentive, measured. No trace of the tension she'd heard in his voice the night before. If he noticed her scrutiny, he gave no sign. As she ate, Isolde found herself reflecting on how quickly life could shift without warning. Just weeks ago, mornings like this had been filled with quiet laughter. Alaric reading the news, while she commented on headlines she barely cared about. Shared glances, casual touches, presence. Now, the routine remained, but the warmth had changed shape. This was her first lesson of the season she was in, though she didn't yet have words for it. Love can exist even when comfort doesn't, and absence, even when justified, leaves a space that must be consciously tended, or it begins to grow heavy. Later that morning, Isolde wandered into the garden, craving fresh air. The sky was clear, the rain from the night before leaving everything clean and bright. She walked slowly, mindful of her steps, enjoying the way the sun warmed her skin. Kaelin followed at a distance, careful not to intrude. "Kaelin," she said eventually, stopping near a stone bench. He approached immediately. "Yes, Mrs. Rowe?" She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "How long have you worked here?" "Nearly 9 years," he answered. "Before the estate expanded." "Before the wealth," she said softly, more observation than question. "Yeah?" She nodded. "You've seen a lot." Then his jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. "I've seen loyalty," he said, "and responsibility." Isolde studied him. Those are heavy things to carry alone. For a moment, it seemed as if he might say more. Instead, he bowed his head slightly. "My duty is to ensure your well-being." "I know," she said gently. "I appreciate it." As he stepped back again, Isolde felt a strange mixture of reassurance and uncertainty. It was another quiet lesson, unfolding in real time. Protection, when unexplained, can feel as unsettling as neglect. That afternoon, Alaric called. His voice filled the space between them, familiar and grounding. He asked how she was feeling, whether she'd been resting, whether the baby had been active. He spoke about meetings, timelines, progress, always circling back to reassurance. "I'll be home before you know it," he said. "I know," Isolde replied, though something in her chest ached. "Just don't forget to rest, too." He laughed softly. "I promise." When the call ended, she stared at her phone for a long moment. Communication mattered. She knew that, yet she also knew that communication without transparency could still leave space for doubt. Alaric wasn't lying to her. She believed that deeply. But there were layers he wasn't sharing, and she couldn't tell whether they were meant to protect her or protect him. That night, the house settled into its familiar quiet once more. Isolde lay in bed, unable to sleep, her thoughts drifting back through memories of her marriage. She remembered the early days, how they'd promised to always speak honestly, even when it was uncomfortable. How they'd agreed that silence, no matter how well-intentioned, could become harmful if it created distance. It was another lesson she hadn't realized she was learning until now. Good intentions do not erase emotional consequences. Down the hall, Kaelin stood outside her door, listening for movement as he had every night since Alaric left. He never entered, never knocked. His role was not to interfere, but to ensure. Inside, Isolde turned onto her side, her hand resting protectively over her belly. "I'm trying to do this right," she whispered. "I'm trying to trust." Trust, she was learning, wasn't passive. It was active. It required courage, patience, and sometimes the willingness to sit with discomfort without letting it harden into fear. In the days that followed, Isolde settled into a fragile rhythm. Mornings in the garden, afternoons reading or preparing the nursery, evenings waiting for Alaric's calls. Through it all, Kaelin remained quietly present, never overstepping, never explaining, and slowly another truth began to surface in her heart. Loneliness doesn't always come from being alone. Sometimes it comes from being surrounded by people who can't tell you what you need to know. One evening, as she stood by the nursery window, Isolde felt a sudden emotional weight press against her chest. Tears surfaced unexpectedly, blurring her vision. She sank into the chair beside the crib, breathing carefully until the feeling passed. It was then she understood something deeply important, something she would one day share with others if she had the chance. Pregnancy wasn't just physical. It magnified everything, every emotion, every doubt, every hope. And in that heightened state, truth mattered more than ever. Outside the room, Kaelin stood motionless, listening to the quiet sob she tried to hide. His hand clenched briefly at his side, before relaxing again. He had promised, and promises, once made, shaped everything that followed. Isolde wiped her eyes, steadying herself. She looked around the nursery, the soft colors, the small clothes waiting patiently, the future taking shape in silence. "I'm stronger than I think," she told herself. "I have to be." It was the final lesson of this chapter, one she hadn't chosen but was learning all the same. Strength doesn't arrive all at once. It builds quietly, moment by moment, when love is tested and we choose not to let fear decide for us. That night, as the house settled again into stillness, Isolde finally slept, and in the quiet corridors, the secret remained exactly where it was, waiting. If this story touched you even a little, take a moment to like this video. It helps more people who need stories like this find it. And tell me in the comments, do you believe secrets meant to protect someone can still cause harm? I'd really love to hear your thoughts. If you're new here, subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson. These stories aren't just about love. They're about the lessons love teaches us when life gets complicated. Chapter 2 is where things begin to shift, and the truth starts pressing closer than anyone expects. Don't miss it. The first real change came quietly, not with an argument, not with a dramatic phone call, but with a pause. It happened during one of Alaric's nightly calls. Isolde sat on the edge of the bed, her phone pressed to her ear, listening to the familiar sound of his breathing on the other end. He was speaking about meetings, time zones, schedules, details she had learned to nod along to over the years. Then, without warning, he stopped, just long enough for silence to slip between them. "Isolde?" He said, finally. "Yes? Are you all right?" The question was gentle. "Concerned?" And yet it landed heavily in her chest. "I'm fine," she replied, automatically. She had always been good at that, reassuring others, minimizing herself, keeping things steady so no one else had to worry. Alaric exhaled slowly. "You sound tired." She smiled, even though he couldn't see it. "That's pregnancy for you." He didn't respond right away. And in that small gap, Isolde felt something shift. Not because he had done anything wrong, but because distance had a way of magnifying what went unsaid. They ended the call with familiar words. "I love you. Rest well." Soon, yet when the screen went dark, Isolde didn't feel comforted. She felt unfinished. This was the first lesson of this chapter, though she wouldn't have named it then. When communication becomes routine, intention matters more than words. The days that followed unfolded with careful repetition. Isolde woke early, her sleep light and restless. She spent mornings in the garden or reading by the windows, her hand resting over her belly, as if grounding herself in the present. Afternoons were quieter, too quiet, filled with preparation for a future that felt both close and distant at the same time. And always there was Kalen, never intrusive, never absent. She noticed now how deliberate his presence was. If she lingered in one room too long, he positioned himself nearby. If she walked outside, he followed at a respectful distance. When she tired easily, he anticipated it before she voiced it. It should have made her feel safe. Instead, it made her curious. One afternoon, as Isolde sat in the sitting room reviewing fabric samples for the nursery, she noticed Kalen standing by the doorway. "You don't have to hover," she said softly, not unkindly. He straightened immediately. "My apologies." She studied him for a moment. "You've been very attentive since my husband left." "Yes," he replied. "Is there a reason?" she asked, her tone calm, inviting honesty rather than confrontation. Kalen's eyes flickered. "Just once. Mr. Rowe asked me to ensure your comfort." "Only comfort?" She pressed gently. A pause. "Your safety," he added. The word settled between them, heavier than the others. Isolde nodded slowly. "I appreciate that." But inside, her thoughts stirred. Why now? Why the change? And what kind of safety required this much vigilance? That evening, Isolde felt the strain of the day settle into her body. Her back ached. Her feet felt heavy. She leaned against the banister halfway up the stairs, catching her breath. Kalen was beside her instantly. "Please," he said, "let me help." This time, she didn't object. As he supported her carefully, she became aware of how controlled his movements were. Never too close, never too familiar. His grip was steady, professional. "I'm not fragile," she said quietly. "I know," he replied. "But strength doesn't cancel risk." The words lingered with her long after he stepped away. That night, Isolde dreamed of doors. Some open, some locked, some standing just slightly ajar. She woke with her heart racing, the sense that something important was happening around her, something she wasn't meant to see yet. The next day brought news she hadn't expected. Alaric's trip would be extended. Just a few more days, he said over the phone. There were complications. Isolde closed her eyes briefly. I understand. And she did. Logically. Emotionally, it felt like another thread tightening. After the call, she sat quietly in the living room, her thoughts drifting to the promises they'd made to each other years ago, about honesty, about sharing burdens rather than carrying them alone. This was the second lesson, unfolding beneath the surface. Sacrifice without transparency can feel like abandonment, even when love remains. Later that evening, the sky darkened early. Clouds gathered, heavy with the promise of rain. Isolde stood by the window, watching the world blur beyond the glass. She heard footsteps behind her. Mrs. Rowe, Kaelin said softly. She turned. Yes? Please forgive me for asking, he began, then hesitated. But have you been feeling unsettled? The question caught her off guard. Yes, she admitted. I have. He nodded once, as if confirming something he already knew. You are not alone, he said carefully. She searched his face. That's a comforting thing to say, but it feels incomplete. Kaelin drew a slow breath. Some things can't be explained until the right moment. And who decides when that is? She asked. Sometimes, he said quietly. Time does. The answer frustrated her more than silence would have. After he left, Isolde sat down heavily, emotion rising unexpectedly to the surface. Tears came, not dramatic, not overwhelming, but steady and insistent. She rested her hands over her belly, grounding herself again. I need honesty, she whispered, not protection that keeps me in the dark. This was another educational truth forming through experience rather than instruction. Emotional safety requires information. Without it, reassurance loses its power. That night, Isolde couldn't sleep. She padded quietly through the hallway, stopping outside Alaric's private study. The door was closed, as it always was. She hesitated, her hand hovering near the handle. She didn't open. Respect had always been part of their marriage. Trust, too, but respect didn't erase curiosity, and trust didn't mean blind acceptance. She returned to her room, unsettled. Outside her door, Kaelin stood guard once more, unaware that Isolde now understood something important. Whatever he was protecting her from was close, and whatever Alaric was doing so far away was more than business. As the rain finally began to fall, Isolde lay awake, listening to it tap against the windows. She didn't know it yet, but this chapter of her life was teaching her one of the most difficult lessons of all. Love must grow with truth, or it begins to strain under the weight of unanswered questions. The first real change came quietly, not with an argument, not with a dramatic phone call, but with a pause, It happened during one of Alaric's nightly calls. Isolde sat on the edge of the bed, her phone pressed to her ear, listening to the familiar sound of his breathing on the other end. He was speaking about meetings, time zones, schedules, details she had learned to nod along to over the years. Then, without warning, he stopped, just long enough for silence to slip between them. "Isolde?" he said finally. "Yes, are you all right?" The question was gentle, concerned, and yet it landed heavily in her chest. "I'm fine," she replied automatically. She had always been good at that, reassuring others, minimizing herself, keeping things steady so no one else had to worry. Alaric exhaled slowly. "You sound tired," she smiled, even though he couldn't see it. "That's pregnancy for you." He didn't respond right away, and in that small gap, Isolde felt something shift. Not because he had done anything wrong, but because distance had a way of magnifying what went unsaid. They ended the call with familiar words. "I love you. Rest well. Soon." Yet, when the screen went dark, Isolde didn't feel comforted. She felt finished. This was the first lesson of this chapter, though she wouldn't have named it then. When communication becomes routine, intention matters more than words. The days that followed unfolded with careful repetition. Isolde woke early, her sleep light and restless. She spent mornings in the garden or reading by the windows, her hand resting over her belly as if grounding herself in the present. Afternoons were quieter, too quiet, filled with preparation for a future that felt both close and distant at the same time. And always there was Kaelin, never intrusive, never absent. She noticed now how deliberate his presence was. If she lingered in one room too long, he positioned himself nearby. If she walked outside, he followed at a respectful distance. When she tired easily, he anticipated it before she voiced it. It should have made her feel safe. Instead, it made her curious. One afternoon, as Isolde sat in the sitting room reviewing fabric samples for the nursery, she noticed Kaelin standing by the doorway. "You don't have to hover," she said softly, not unkindly. He straightened immediately. "My apologies." She studied him for a moment. "You've been very attentive since my husband left." "Yes," he replied. "There a reason?" she asked, her tone calm, inviting honesty rather than confrontation. Kaelin's eyes flickered. Just once. "Mr. Rowe asked me to assure your comfort." "Lee comfort?" She pressed gently. "Pause. Your safety," he added. The word settled between them, heavier than the others. Isolde nodded slowly. "I appreciate that." But inside, her thoughts stirred. Why now? Why the change? And what kind of safety required this much vigilance? That evening, Isolde felt the strain of the day settle into her body. Her back ached. Her feet felt heavy. She leaned against the banister halfway up the stairs, catching her breath. Kaelin was beside her instantly. "Please," he said, "let me help." This time, she didn't object. As he supported her carefully, she became aware of how controlled his movements were, never too close, never too familiar. His grip was steady, professional. "I'm not fragile," she said quietly. "I know," he replied, "but strength doesn't cancel risk." The words lingered with her long after he stepped away. That night, Isolde dreamed of doors. Some open, some locked, some standing just slightly ajar. She woke with her heart racing, the sense that something important was happening around her, something she wasn't meant to see yet. The next day brought news she hadn't expected. Alaric's trip would be extended. "Just a few more days," he said over the phone. "There complications." Isolde closed her eyes briefly. "I understand." And she did, logically. Emotionally, it felt like another thread tightening. After the call, she sat quietly in the living room, her thoughts drifting to the promises they'd made to each other years ago, about honesty, about sharing burdens rather than carrying them alone. This was the second lesson, unfolding beneath the surface. Sacrifice without transparency can feel like abandonment, even when love remains. Later that evening, the sky darkened early. Clouds gathered, heavy with the promise of rain. Isolde stood by the window, watching the world blur beyond the glass. She heard footsteps behind her. "Mrs. Rowe," Kaylin said softly. She turned. "Yes? Please forgive me for asking," he began, then hesitated. "But have you been feeling unsettled?" The question caught her off guard. "Yes," she admitted. "I have." He nodded once, as if confirming something he already knew. "You are not alone," he said carefully. She searched his face. "That's a comforting thing to say, but it feels incomplete." Kaylin drew a slow breath. Some things can't be explained until the right moment. And who decides when that is? She asked. "Sometimes," he said quietly. "Time does." The answer frustrated her more than silence would have. After he left, Isolde sat down heavily, emotion rising unexpectedly to the surface. Tears came, not dramatic, not overwhelming, but steady and insistent. She rested her hands over her belly, grounding herself again. "I need honesty," she whispered. "Not protection that keeps me in the dark." This was another educational truth forming through experience rather than instruction. Emotional safety requires information. Without it, reassurance loses its power. That night, Isolde couldn't sleep. She padded quietly through the hallway, stopping outside Alaric's private study. The door was closed, as it always was. She hesitated, her hand hovering near the handle. She didn't open it. Respect had always been part of their marriage. Trust, too. But respect didn't erase curiosity, and trust didn't mean blind acceptance. She returned to her room, unsettled. Outside her door, Kaylin stood guard once more, unaware that Isolde now understood something important. Whatever he was protecting her from was close, and whatever Alaric was doing so far away was more than business. As the rain finally began to fall, Isolde lay awake, listening to it tap against the windows. She didn't know it yet, but this chapter of her life was teaching her one of the most difficult lessons of all. Love must grow with truth, or it begins to strain under the weight of unanswered questions. Loneliness doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives quietly, slipping into the spaces between routine and expectation, settling where conversation used to live. For Isolde, it arrived one ordinary afternoon. She stood in the nursery, folding a small white blanket that smelled faintly of fresh cotton. The room was nearly finished now. Soft colors, gentle light, everything prepared for a life that felt both near and impossibly far away. She paused, the blanket held to her chest, and listened. Nothing, no footsteps, no distant voices, no familiar sounds of someone else sharing the space. The house wasn't empty, but it felt hollow. She lowered herself into the rocking chair, moving slowly, carefully. The gentle motion soothed her body, but did little for her thoughts. Her mind drifted, as it often did now, toward the same questions she had been circling for days. Why did protection feel like surveillance? Why did reassurance feel incomplete? And why did love, something that had once felt so steady, now feel like something she had to actively hold together? This was the first educational truth emerging in this chapter. Though Isolde hadn't named it yet, emotional loneliness can exist even when care is present, if understanding is missing. A soft knock came at the door. "Mrs. Rowe?" Kalen's voice was careful, respectful. "Yes," she replied. He stepped inside, just enough to speak. "You have a call. Your sister." Relief flickered through her. "Thank you." The call was brief but grounding. Familiar laughter, shared memories, reassurance that she wasn't imagining the emotional weight she'd been carrying. When it ended, Isolde felt lighter, reminded of something important. Connection doesn't have to be constant to be real, but it does need honesty to remain strong. That evening, she prepared for dinner alone. The long table felt unnecessary now, so she ate in the smaller sitting area near the window. Outside, the sky glowed softly with fading light. Kalen stood nearby, as he always did. "Do you ever get tired?" she asked suddenly. He looked up, surprised. "Of what?" "Of watching," she said. "Of standing guard." He considered the question. Some responsibilities don't allow for fatigue. Do they allow for choice? She asked. He hesitated. "Not always." She nodded, slowly. "That's heavier than it sounds." He didn't disagree. Later that night, Isolde lay awake again, staring at the ceiling, listening to the subtle sounds of the house settling. She felt the familiar movement beneath her hand, a gentle reminder that she wasn't alone, even if she felt like it. She thought about the life she wanted her child to grow into, a life where communication wasn't withheld in the name of protection. A life where love included trust, not just intention. This was another lesson, forming quietly. The way we protect others teaches them what to expect from love. Morning brought a shift. Isolde woke, feeling unusually tired, her body heavier than usual. She moved carefully, taking more time with each step. Downstairs, Kaylin noticed immediately. "You're moving slower," he said, gently. "I didn't sleep well," she admitted. He nodded. "I'll have breakfast brought to the sitting room." She opened her mouth to object, then stopped herself. "Thank you," she said instead. It was a small thing, but it mattered. Accepting help didn't mean weakness. It meant recognizing limits. As the day unfolded, Isolde spent time journaling, something she hadn't done since before the pregnancy. She wrote about uncertainty, about trust, about how silence, even well-meaning silence, could create emotional distance. Writing clarified something she hadn't realized she was feeling. She didn't need everything explained. She needed to feel included. In the afternoon, Alaric called again. His voice sounded tired. "I hate being this far away," he admitted. Her heart softened at the honesty. "Then tell me what you can." There was another pause, but this one felt different. Less guarded, more conflicted. "I will," he said. Soon, the promise felt fragile. After the call, Isolde walked slowly through the hallway, stopping again near Alaric's study. She didn't enter. She didn't touch anything, but she stood there longer than before. Awareness, she was learning, changed how spaces felt. That night, as she prepared for bed, Isolde caught her reflection in the mirror. She looked different than she had weeks ago. Not physically, but emotionally. Stronger in some ways, more questioning in others. She realized something important then. Growth doesn't always feel empowering in the moment. Sometimes it feels uncomfortable, uncertain, and lonely. Outside her door, Kaylin stood guard again, his posture unchanged. Inside, Isolde settled into bed, exhaustion finally overtaking her thoughts. As sleep claimed her, the house remained still, holding its secrets, its promises, and its quiet lessons. And though she didn't know it yet, this season of loneliness was preparing her for a truth that would require strength she was only just beginning to build. The days began to blur together, not because nothing happened, but because everything felt suspended, waiting for something unnamed to arrive. Isolde moved through the house with growing awareness. Every room carried echoes of a life she used to share, and now inhabited alone. Even the sunlight felt different, less celebratory, more observant. She spent mornings in the garden, sitting on a stone bench beneath the shade of an old tree. It was there, with fresh air filling her lungs, that she felt most grounded. The rhythm of nature reminded her that growth didn't require certainty, only patience. One afternoon, as she rested there, Kaylin approached quietly. "You shouldn't stay out too long," he said. "The air's cooler today." She smiled faintly. You always notice. It's my responsibility, he replied. She tilted her head. Responsibility can look a lot like care. He paused. Sometimes they overlap. She studied him, and sometimes they hide things. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes tightened. You don't trust me, he said, not accusing, observing. I don't mistrust you, she corrected gently, but I don't understand you. He lowered his gaze. Understanding isn't always possible before timing allows it. The answer left her thoughtful rather than frustrated. Later that evening, Isolde felt a wave of emotion rise unexpectedly. Not fear, not anger, sadness. She sat alone in the living room, hands resting on her belly, and allowed herself to feel it fully instead of pushing it away. Tears slipped quietly down her cheeks. This was another lesson she would one day share with others. Suppressing emotion doesn't make it disappear. Acknowledging it allows healing to begin. When she finally stood to go to bed, she felt lighter. The night passed without dreams. Morning arrived with soft rain tapping against the windows once more. Isolde woke slowly, her body stiff, her thoughts clearer than they'd been in days. She dressed carefully and made her way downstairs, determined to reclaim some sense of normalcy. Breakfast felt different today. Not heavy, not tense, just quiet. As she finished her tea, she looked up at Galen. May I ask you something honestly? She said. Yes, he replied immediately. The roles were reversed. If you were in my place, what would you want? He didn't answer right away. Truth, he said finally, even if it was difficult. Her breath caught slightly. Then why isn't that being given? She asked. Because, he said quietly, truth can cause harm if revealed at the wrong time. And secrecy can cause harm too, she replied. Their eyes held. There was no argument in the moment, only mutual recognition. That afternoon, Isolde received another call from Alaric. This time, she didn't soften her voice. I need more than reassurance, she said calmly. I need inclusion. There was violence. Then, for the first time since he'd left, Alaric sounded uncertain. I didn't realize how much I was asking you to carry alone, he admitted. Her chest tightened, not with pain, but with relief. That's the problem, she said. I shouldn't be carrying it alone. He exhaled slowly. You're right. The call ended with something new between them. Not answers, but acknowledgement. That night, Isolde slept more soundly than she had in days. In the hallway, Kalen stood watch as always, but his posture was different now. Less rigid, more resolved. He knew the truth would soon demand daylight, and he knew that when it did, everything would change. Inside her room, Isolde rested peacefully, unaware that this chapter of loneliness had taught her something vital. Silence can teach strength, but only honesty can bring peace. The house remained quiet, but it no longer felt hollow. It felt poised. Trust doesn't usually break all at once. More often, it stretches quietly until you feel the strain and realize it's been carrying weight longer than you noticed. For Isolde, that realization came on a morning that looked ordinary from the outside. She woke feeling unusually alert, her thoughts clearer than they had been in days. The emotional fog that had followed her since Alaric's departure seemed thinner now, not gone, but no longer suffocating. She dressed slowly, choosing comfort over appearance, and made her way downstairs. Kalen was already there. "You're up early," he noted. "I couldn't sleep," she said, "but not for the same reasons as before." He inclined his head slightly. "I'm glad." She paused. "Are you?" He hesitated. "I am glad you feel steadier." It was a careful answer. After breakfast, Isolde made a decision she'd been circling for days. "I want to walk the east path," she said casually. Kalen looked up immediately. "That trail is uneven. I'll take my time." He considered for a moment, then nodded. "I'll accompany you." The path curved through a quieter part of the property, where trees grew closer together and the world felt more contained. Isolde walked slowly, enjoying the calm, her breath steady. After a few minutes, she spoke. "Why do you stay?" she asked. "With the household?" Kalen replied. "With the responsibility," she clarified. "You could have left year ago." He thought about it. Some obligations aren't bound by contracts. "And what binds yours?" she asked. "Trust," he said simply. The word lingered. They reached a small clearing where sunlight filtered through the branches. Isolde sat carefully on a stone bench, her hands resting over her belly. "You watch me like you're guarding something," she said softly. Kalen remained standing. "I am." "Then tell me what it is." His jaw tightened. "I can't because of my husband?" she asked. "Yes." The answer surprised her with its honesty. She nodded slowly. "Does he trust me?" Kalen met her gaze completely. "Then why am I the only one in the dark?" Silence. This was the first real fracture. Not of trust, but of patience. Isolde stood, steadier than she felt. "I'm not asking to be protected from fear," she said. "I'm asking to be trusted with the truth." Kalen looked away. As they walked back toward the house, Isolde felt a familiar emotional pull, less sharp now, more determined. She understood something she hadn't before. Love matures when both people are allowed to face difficulty together. Later that afternoon, Alaric called again. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began. "Good," Isolde replied gently. "I didn't want to burden you," he said. "But I may have underestimated your strength." She closed her eyes briefly. "Protection that excludes me doesn't feel like protection." "I know," he admitted. And I'm sorry. The apology mattered, but it wasn't enough. That evening, Isolde sat alone in the study for the first time. She hadn't opened drawers, hadn't searched, hadn't crossed boundaries. She had simply sat in the space where Alaric spent so much of his time. It felt grounding rather than intrusive. She realized something important then. Being close to the truth doesn't require possession. Sometimes presence is enough. Outside the door, Kalen stood motionless. He knew the balance was tipping. That night, as Isolde prepared for bed, she caught sight of Kalen's reflection in the mirror behind her. "You don't trust me to handle what's coming," she said quietly. He shook his head. "I don't trust the timing." "And who decides that?" she asked. "Circumstances," he replied. She turned to face him fully. "Circumstances don't live with the consequences. People do." The words landed. For the first time, Kalen's composure wavered. "I gave my word," he said quietly. "And I gave mine," she replied. "To build a family rooted in honesty." They stood there, the weight of competing loyalties filling the space between them. When he finally stepped back, Isolde understood something clearly. Whatever secret Kalen was hiding wasn't small, and whatever promise he had made was beginning to crack under the weight of truth. The tension didn't fade overnight. If anything, it settled deeper, no longer sharp, but steady, like something waiting patiently to be acknowledged. Isolde woke early again, her sleep shallow but uninterrupted. She lay still for a moment, listening to the quiet rhythm of the house. It no longer felt empty. It felt restrained, like a held breath. She rose slowly and dressed, choosing a soft sweater that made her feel anchored. Downstairs, breakfast was already prepared, but she didn't sit right away. Instead, she walked through the hall toward the study. The door stood closed. She rested her hand briefly against the wood, not to open it, but to acknowledge the boundary. Respect, she reminded herself, wasn't weakness, but it also didn't require silence. When she turned back, Kalen stood several feet away, giving her space. "You're going to keep standing there," she said quietly, "until something changes." He didn't deny it. "I won't force you to tell me," she continued, "but I won't pretend this isn't affecting me." His voice was low. "I never meant for it to." "I know," she said. "That's what makes it difficult." They ate breakfast in silence, not strained, just thoughtful. Later that morning, Isolde sat in the sitting room, sunlight warming the space. She picked up a book, but found herself reading the same sentence repeatedly. Her thoughts returned to Alaric, not his absence, but his intentions. He had always believed in shielding the people he loved. It was part of his character. Responsibility had shaped him long before wealth did. But what he sometimes failed to see was that protection could feel like exclusion when it lacked trust. This was the educational truth emerging now. True partnership requires shared burden, not selective silence. Around midday, her phone rang. Aller, she answered immediately. "I'm coming home sooner," he said. Her breath caught. "When?" "2 days," he replied. "I should have told you more. I didn't because I thought I was sparing you." She closed her eyes briefly. And now I realize you don't need to be spared," he said. "You need to be included." The words softened something in her chest. "Thank you," she said. "That matters." After the call, Isolde felt lighter, but also aware that his return wouldn't erase what had already been set in motion. Whatever the truth was, it had its own momentum. That evening, Isolde walked through the nursery again, touching the edge of the crib, imagining a future where honesty wasn't delayed until it was unavoidable. She understood something important then. Timing can protect people temporarily, but truth sustains relationships long-term. Later, as dusk settled in, she found Kalen in the corridor. "My husband is coming home," she said. His posture stiffened slightly. "I know." She searched his face. "Then you also know that whatever you're holding won't stay hidden much longer." "Yes," he admitted. "Does that frighten you?" she asked. He hesitated. "It concerns me." "For me or for you?" she asked gently. "For everyone," he replied. That night, Isolde sat by the window, watching the stars emerge one by one. She felt calmer than she had in days, not because answers had arrived, but because honesty had begun to move toward the surface. She rested her hands over her belly, feeling a slow, reassuring movement. "You're teaching me patience," she whispered. "And courage." Outside her door, Kalen stood watch, but his stance had shifted again. Less guarded, more resigned. He knew the moment was approaching. And for the first time, Isolde sensed that the secret, whatever it was, had never been meant to divide her and Alaric. It had been meant to protect something fragile. But fragile things, she was learning, don't survive without light. The rain returned the night Isolde realized she was done waiting. It didn't arrive suddenly. There was no thunder, no dramatic wind, just a steady rhythm against the windows, as if the world itself was marking time. She stood in the living room, watching droplets slide down the glass, her reflection faintly visible in the dark. 2 days. That was all that remained before Alaric came home. And yet, it felt like everything important was happening now. She turned from the window and walked slowly toward the hallway that led to the study. Her steps were measured, not impulsive, not rushed. She had learned enough in the past weeks to know that emotional decisions made in haste often created consequences that lingered longer than the problem itself. This was another lesson, forming quietly. Clarity often arrives when emotion settles, not when it peaks. She stopped several feet from the door and exhaled. "Kalen," she said softly. He emerged from the shadows of the corridor. as if he had been waiting there all along. "Yes, Mrs. Rowe, I'm not here to search," she said. "I'm here to understand." He didn't respond immediately. "You've been guarding more than the house," she continued. "You've been guarding a moment." His jaw tightened. "I've been guarding a promise." "To whom?" she asked. "To your husband," he replied. "And to you." The answer surprised her. She turned to face him fully. "Then why does it feel like I'm the only one being protected from the truth?" Kalen lowered his gaze. "Because knowledge changes how people feel, and silence changes how people trust," she replied. They stood there, rain filling the pauses between them. "I won't force you," Isolde said, "but I need you to know something." He looked up. "I'm strong enough to hear difficult truths," she said, "especially when they affect my child." The mention of her pregnancy shifted something in him. He exhaled slowly. "The truth isn't dangerous," he said, "but its timing is delicate." "Delicate for whom?" she asked. "For your peace," he answered. "And what about my agency?" She asked quietly. "My right to decide how much I can carry?" The question landed. Kalen turned away briefly, then back again. "I was told to keep you safe," he said. "Not just physically, but emotionally." "And who decides what hurts me?" she asked. Silence. This was the heart of the conflict. Not secrets, not loyalty, but control masked as care. They moved to the sitting room. The tension between them quieter now, but no less present. "Why now?" she asked. "Why has everything changed since my husband left?" Kalen hesitated, then said carefully, "Because absence creates vulnerability, and presence creates responsibility," she replied. He met her eyes. Exactly. That night, Isolde didn't sleep. Instead, she wrote. She wrote about trust, about love, about how protection without voice could feel isolating, even when it came from good intentions. She wrote about the kind of relationship she wanted to model for her child. This was another educational truth unfolding. Children learn how to accept love by watching how adults give it. Morning arrived quietly. Isolde felt tired, but resolved. At breakfast, she barely spoke, not from anger, but from focus. Later, she received a call from Alaric. "I should have trusted you sooner," he said. She listened, her heart steady. "I thought strength meant handling things alone," he continued. "But I'm learning that strength can also mean sharing." She smiled faintly. "It means choosing partnership." There was a pause. "Kalen has done exactly what I asked of him." "I know," she said. "That doesn't make it easy." "No," he agreed, "but it makes it understandable. After the call, Isolde walked through the house, noticing how it felt different now. Not quieter, but more awake. That evening, she stood again in the hallway, listening to the rain. She understood something clearly now. Whatever the servant's secret was, it was not rooted in betrayal. It was rooted in protection that had gone too far without consent. And tomorrow, she sensed, the line between silence and truth would finally be crossed. The storm broke just before dawn. Rain fell harder now, striking the windows with urgency, as if the sky itself could no longer hold back. Isolde woke with a start, her heart racing, not from fear, but from a sense that something had shifted. She sat up slowly, steadying her breath. The house felt different, not tense, resolved. She dressed carefully and made her way downstairs, the sound of her steps echoing softly through the halls. In the kitchen, lights were already on. Kalen stood near the counter, his posture rigid. "You're awake early," he said. "So are you," she replied. He nodded once. "I didn't sleep." "Neither did I." They shared a moment of mutual acknowledgement. "I want to be clear," Isolde said quietly. "I'm not asking you to break your promise." Kalen looked at her, surprised. "I'm asking you to stop assuming what I can handle," she continued. He inhaled slowly. "You deserve honesty." "Yes," she said, "and timing, that includes me." He lowered his gaze. "Your husband believed waiting was kinder, and I believe partnership is kinder," she replied. The words settled between them, not as accusation, but as truth. Kalen turned slightly, as if weighing something invisible. "There are measures in place," he said carefully. "Precautions." "For what?" she asked. "For uncertainty," he replied. "That's not an answer," she said gently. He sighed. "No." Later that morning, Isolde received another message from Alaric. "I'll be on the first flight home tomorrow." Relief washed through her, followed closely by resolve. She spent the day preparing, not the house, but herself. She walked, she rested, she reflected. She realized how much she had learned during his absence, not about betrayal or danger, but about herself. She had learned that love didn't disappear under pressure. It evolved, and sometimes evolution required discomfort. As evening fell, the storm finally eased. The world outside felt calmer, as if it too had come to a conclusion. Isolde sat in the living room, reading, when Kalen approached. "There's something you should know," he said. Her heart tilled. "Before your husband returns," he continued, "you need to understand why I stayed so close." She met his gaze. "I'm listening." He hesitated, then spoke. "There were concerns," he said, "about your safety." Her breath caught, not in panic, but in focus. "From whom?" she asked. He paused. "Not from inside this house." She nodded slowly. That's why the precautions, he added. Why the watchfulness? Why not tell me? She asked. Because fear can harm as much as danger, he replied. And silence can do the same, she said. He accepted that without argument. I won't give details, he said. Those belong to your husband. But I needed you to know this much. Isolde absorbed the information quietly. So the secret wasn't betrayal. It was vigilance, protection, care. Misguided, perhaps, but sincere. This was the educational truth solidifying now. Safety isn't just about preventing harm. It's about empowering people with awareness. That night, Isolde slept more soundly than she had in weeks. The storm had passed. Answers were close. And whatever tomorrow brought, she would meet it informed, not sheltered. If this chapter made you pause and think, go ahead and tap the like button. It helps stories like this reach the people who need them most. Now, tell me in the comments, do you believe it's right to protect someone from the truth if you think it's for their own good? Or do you believe honesty should always come first? If you're enjoying this story, subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson so you don't miss what happens next. Chapter 6 is where the truth begins to surface, and the promise Kaelin made will finally be tested. The morning Alaric was due to return, the house felt awake before anyone moved. Isolde noticed it the moment she opened her eyes. Not the usual quiet, but a kind of readiness, like the air itself was waiting for something to arrive. She lay still for a moment, one hand resting over her belly, listening to the rhythm of her own breathing. There was no fear in her chest now, only anticipation and resolve. Whatever the truth was, she would face it with clarity. Downstairs, Kaelin was already in motion. He spoke quietly to staff, his instructions precise, his demeanor focused. Yet beneath the calm, something else stirred, an awareness that the promise he had made was nearing its limit. When Isolde entered the kitchen, he turned immediately. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," she replied. "He's on his way." Yes, the confirmation didn't change anything, but it shifted everything. They shared a moment of mutual understanding. Today, silence would no longer be enough. Isolde spent the morning preparing herself, not the house. She chose comfortable clothes. She rested when her body asked her to. She drank tea slowly, grounding herself in each moment. She thought about the last few weeks, not with resentment, but with insight. She had learned that love could endure uncertainty. That protection, when unshared, could feel isolating. And that strength often revealed itself quietly, long before it was tested openly. This chapter of her life had already taught her something invaluable. Truth doesn't weaken love. Avoiding it does. Late morning, her phone buzzed. Landing in an hour. She exhaled slowly. Kaelin approached her in the sitting room. "There are things your husband will explain," he said carefully. "But I need you to know this before he does." She looked up. "Go on." "My role," he said, "was never about mistrust. It was about prevention." "Prevention of what?" she asked. "Risk," he replied. "Not from you. Not from him. From circumstances neither of you created." She nodded. "And you believed I was safer not knowing." "Yes." "Now?" she asked. "And now," he said quietly, "I believe you're safer understanding." The admission mattered. They heard the distant sound of a car approaching. The moment had arrived. Isolde moved to the entryway, her heart steady. When the door opened and Alaric stepped inside, time seemed to pause. He looked tired, but present, grounded in a way that distance hadn't allowed. Their eyes met. He crossed the space between them immediately, careful and unhurried, his hand resting over hers and then over her belly. "I'm home," he said softly. Relief washed through her. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, just real. "Welcome back," she replied. They stood there for a moment, longer than necessary, letting the world catch up. Kaelin stepped back, giving them space. But he didn't leave. Alaric noticed. "We'll talk," Alaric said to him. "Yes," Kaelin replied. They moved to the sitting room, the place where so many unspoken moments had gathered. Alaric turned to Isolde, his expression open. "I owe you honesty," he said. Sorry I waited." She nodded. "I'm listening." He took a breath. "There were concerns," he began. "Not about you, but about outside pressures. Business decisions I made created a tension I didn't anticipate." She absorbed his words calmly. "Kaelin was assigned to ensure nothing touched you while I resolved it," he continued. "I believed shielding you was kindness. And now?" she asked. "And now I know that kindness without inclusion isn't partnership," he said. Her eyes softened. This was the educational truth coming into focus. Protection must evolve into transparency if love is to remain balanced. "I never doubted your intentions," Isolde said. "I just needed to trusted." Alec reached for her hand. "You are." Kaelin remained silent, his role nearly complete. "Thank you," Alaric said to him, "for keeping your word." Kaelin inclined his head. "Always." As the conversation continued, Isolde felt something settle inside her. Not answers to every question, but alignment. And alignment, she realized, was the foundation of peace. The secret had not been betrayal. It had been fear of causing worry, of burdening someone already carrying so much. But fear, she now understood, could not guide love forever. That afternoon, as sunlight filtered through the windows, Isolde rested against Alaric's shoulder, his hand steady over hers. She wasn't angry. She wasn't resentful. She was informed. That made all the difference. The house exhaled once Alaric was home. It wasn't something anyone could point to or explain, but Isolde felt it in the way the room seemed warmer, the way the silence no longer pressed in on her chest. Presence had returned, not just physical, but emotional. They sat together in the sitting room, sunlight stretching across the floor. Alaric hadn't rushed into explanations. Instead, he held her hand, grounding both of them before words could complicate things. "I should have trusted our partnership more," he said quietly. Isolde leaned into him. "And I should have spoken sooner when I felt the distance." He shook his head gently. "No, I should have noticed it." This moment carried another lesson, one that unfolded naturally rather than being taught. Responsibility in love includes awareness, not just intention. Kalen remained nearby, his posture relaxed for the first time since Alaric had left. His role had shifted from guardian to witness. "I want to be clear about something," Isolde said, turning slightly toward Alaric. "I never needed to be protected from worry. I needed to be protected with you." Alaric nodded. "I see that now," he explained more, not in alarming detail, but enough to replace uncertainty with understanding. Business decisions had drawn attention from outside interests, not danger in the immediate sense, but enough risk that precautions felt necessary. "I didn't want you carrying that weight while you were already carrying so much," he said, glancing at her belly. She smiled faintly. "Love doesn't mean choosing who carries the weight. It means choosing how to carry it together." The words stayed with him. Later that afternoon, Isolde rested in the nursery, while Alaric spoke quietly with Kalen in the hallway. Their voices were low, respectful, an exchange between two men bound by responsibility and loyalty. When Alaric returned, his expression was thoughtful. "He did exactly what I asked," Alaric said, "even when it put him in an impossible position." Isolde nodded. "Loyalty can be heavy when it doesn't come with choice." "Yes," he agreed. Kalen approached then, his demeanor calm. "My responsibility was never to keep you in the dark," he said to Isolde. "It was to ensure you had the future you were promised." "And now?" she asked. "And now," he replied, "that future requires honesty." She met his gaze. "Thank you for your care, even when it felt uncomfortable." He inclined his head, relief flickering across his face. That evening, as the sky dimmed, Isolde and Alaric walked slowly through the garden together. The air was cool, calm. Their steps were unhurried. "I missed this," Isolde said. "Being here?" Alaric asked. "Being seen," she replied. He stopped walking, turning to her fully. "I see you." The simplicity of the statement mattered. This was another educational truth settling into place. Presence isn't just about proximity. It's about attention. They spoke openly as they walked, about fears, about assumptions, about how easily good intentions could create emotional distance when not paired with communication. "I thought protecting you meant deciding for you," Alaric admitted. "And I thought trusting you meant waiting quietly," Isolde replied. They smiled softly at each other. "Turns out," he said, "we both needed to adjust." That night, they lay in bed together, the distance between them erased. Alaric rested his hand over her belly, feeling the gentle movement beneath. "She's strong," he murmured. "So am I," Isolde replied. He smiled. "Yes, you are." As sleep approached, Isolde felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in weeks, not because everything was resolved, but because nothing remained hidden between them. The secret that had hovered over the house had not been one of betrayal or deceit. It had been one of fear, fear of causing pain, fear of burdening someone already vulnerable. But fear, Isolde now understood, could not be the foundation of love. Truth had to be, and with truth present, love felt steadier than ever. Outside their door, Kalen stood for a final moment, then quietly stepped away. His watch was no longer needed. Peace doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it settles in quietly, almost cautiously, as if unsure whether it's truly welcome. That was how it felt the morning after Alaric's return. Isolde woke to the familiar warmth beside her, the steady rhythm of his breathing grounding her in the present. For a moment she stayed still, letting herself absorb the simple comfort of not being alone. The weeks of distance hadn't vanished overnight, but they no longer sat between them like an unspoken wall. She turned slightly, careful not to wake him, and rested her hand over her belly. There it was, the soft, reassuring movement that reminded her of everything this season was building toward. Not just answers, but growth. Downstairs, the house moved differently now. Staff spoke more freely. The air felt lighter. Even the light streaming through the windows seemed warmer. Yet peace, Isolde was learning, didn't mean the absence of work. It meant the presence of honesty. Later that morning, Alaric joined her in the sitting room with 2 cups of tea. He handed one to her, then sat across from her rather than beside her. "I want us to talk," he said, gently. She nodded. "So do I." They had learned enough to know that conversation wasn't something to rush or avoid. It was something to approach with intention. "I don't want us to return to how things were before," Alaric continued. "Not because they were wrong, but because we've grown." She appreciated that. Growth acknowledged without blame. "I don't want to be protected from reality," Isolde said. "I want to be part of it." "You are," he replied immediately. "I promise." They spoke openly then, about fear, about assumptions, about how easily roles could shift without either of them noticing. Alaric admitted how responsibility had shaped him into someone who believed shielding others was strength. Isolde shared how that shielding had made her feel unseen, even when she knew it came from love. This was the educational truth of this chapter, emerging clearly. Healthy love requires regular recalibration, especially when life changes. Pregnancy had changed her. Wealth had changed him. Love had to evolve with both. Later that day, Isolde walked through the house with fresh awareness. She noticed details she had once overlooked, the way Kalen no longer positioned himself quietly in her line of sight, the way doors that once felt guarded now felt open. She paused near the front windows, watching Alaric speak with someone on the phone. His posture relaxed, his tone open. He wasn't hiding. That mattered. As afternoon settled in, Isolde felt a familiar ache low in her back. She moved slowly to sit, breathing through the discomfort until it passed. Alaric noticed immediately. "You all right?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "Just my body, reminding me I'm not in charge of everything." He smiled. "Neither am I." They shared a quiet laugh, light but meaningful. This was another lesson she was learning in real time. Shared vulnerability creates connection faster than shared control. Later, Isolde found herself alone in the nursery again. But this time, the quiet felt different. It wasn't empty. It was expectant. She ran her hand along the crib's edge, imagining the nights ahead, the exhaustion, the learning, the inevitable mistakes. She realized something important then. She didn't want perfection. She wanted partnership. That evening, Alaric suggested they eat together in the garden. The air was cool, calm, and still. As they sat across from each other, candles flickering softly, the world felt smaller, in a good way. "I thought being strong meant carrying everything," Alaric said quietly. "But I'm learning that real strength is letting someone share the weight." Isolde reached for his hand. "And I'm learning that patience doesn't mean silence." They sat there a long time, speaking honestly, listening fully, not solving everything, but aligning. As night fell, Isolde felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Confidence, not the loud kind, the grounded kind. She understood now that love wasn't something to preserve by hiding truth. It was something to protect by sharing it. Inside the house, Kalen prepared to leave for the evening. He paused briefly, glancing toward the garden, where Isolde and Alaric sat together. His role had changed, but his purpose hadn't. Protection, he now understood, didn't always mean guarding doors. Sometimes it meant stepping aside. As Isolde rested her head against Alaric's shoulder, she felt certain of one thing: the hardest part wasn't the secret. It was learning how to rebuild trust without fear. And this chapter, though quieter than the ones before it, was where that rebuilding truly began. Trust doesn't rebuild itself in grand gestures. It returns through consistency, through showing up the next morning, through listening without interrupting, through choosing honesty, even when it's inconvenient. Isolde noticed this in the days that followed. Alaric didn't rush back into work the way he usually did. He stayed present, walking with her through the garden, asking how she was feeling, sitting beside her in silence, without filling it unnecessarily. It wasn't dramatic, but it was intentional. One morning, as they sat together near the windows, Isolde watched him read through messages on his phone. He didn't turn away. He didn't hide the screen. When something required his attention, he explained it without being asked. "I'll be on this call for an hour," he said. "If you need me, interrupt." The simplicity of it struck her. Transparency didn't require explanation. It required inclusion. This was another educational truth taking shape. Trust grows when information is shared freely, not extracted through tension. Later that afternoon, Isolde felt an unfamiliar tightening in her lower back. She paused, breathing slowly, letting it pass. Alaric noticed immediately. "This normal?" he asked quietly. "Yes," she reassured him. "My body's just working." "Still," he said, "I want to understand it better." She smiled softly. "That means more than you realize." They spent time reading together about pregnancy, about emotional shifts, about how stress could affect both mother and child. Not out of fear, but out of respect. Isolde felt seen in a way she hadn't expected. That evening, Kaelin returned briefly to speak with Alaric. Their conversation was short, professional, and respectful. When he left, Isolde noticed something subtle but significant. He didn't linger. His presence no longer hovered in the background. And that, she realized, was progress. As the days passed, Isolde began to feel a renewed sense of ownership over her space and her life. She made decisions about the nursery without second-guessing herself. She spoke openly about her worries instead of minimizing them. And Alaric listened, not defensively, not dismissively, but fully. This was another lesson unfolding gently. Listening is an act of love when it's done without preparation to respond. One evening, as they sat together after dinner, Isolde asked something she had been holding back. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" she asked. Alaric didn't hesitate. "Because I thought I was protecting you from stress," he said. "But really, I was protecting myself from watching you worry." The honesty surprised her. "That's brave to admit," she said. "I'm learning," he replied. They sat quietly for a moment. "I don't want us to fall into old patterns," Isolde said, "where fear makes decisions for us." "I don't either," Alaric said. "I want us to choose together, even when it's uncomfortable." That night, Isolde slept deeply, not because everything was resolved, but because she trusted the process they were now building together. Morning brought sunlight and calm. Isolde stood by the window, her hands resting over her belly, feeling a quiet strength settle inside her. She thought about the kind of environment she wanted to raise her child in. One where emotions weren't hidden. One where questions were welcomed. One where love meant shared responsibility. This was the clearest educational truth yet. Children don't learn security from perfection. They learn it from honesty and repair. Later that day, Alaric suggested a walk through the East Path, the same trail Isolde had walked with Kaelin weeks earlier. As they moved slowly together, she felt a sense of closure. "I walked this path before," she said, "when I was trying to understand what was happening." He nodded. "And now?" "Now I'm walking it, knowing I'm not alone." she replied. He squeezed her hand gently. They reached the clearing, where sunlight filtered through the trees. Isolde sat on the stone bench, resting comfortably. I used to think strength meant enduring quietly, she said, but now I see it means speaking honestly. And I used to think love meant preventing discomfort, Alaric replied. But now I see it means standing in it together. They smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because it was real. As they walked back toward the house, Isolde felt a calm certainty settle into her heart. The secret had been revealed. The fear had been named. And what remained wasn't damage. It was growth. This chapter didn't end with fireworks or final answers. It ended with alignment. And alignment, Isolde now understood, was the quiet foundation of lasting love. Truth has a way of changing the atmosphere of a place. Not all at once, not dramatically, but subtly, like a shift in light that makes familiar spaces look different. Isolde noticed it as she walked through the house that morning. The rooms felt open in a way they hadn't before. Not because the secret was gone entirely, but because it was no longer pressing against the walls, waiting to be acknowledged. She moved slowly, intentionally, her steps measured not by caution, but by awareness. Pregnancy had taught her to listen to her body, but this season had taught her to listen to her instincts. Both mattered. Alaric sat at the dining table, reviewing documents on his tablet. When he looked up and saw her, he smiled, an unguarded expression that reached his eyes. "Did you sleep well?" he asked. "Yes," she replied. "Better than I expected." He closed the tablet and set it aside. "Good. That matters more than anything else today." She appreciated that he hadn't rushed back into the version of himself that was always available to everyone else. His presence felt chosen, not assumed. This was another quiet lesson forming. Priorities reveal themselves not in words, but in what we put down. After breakfast, Alaric suggested they take a drive together. Nothing long, nothing demanding. Just space beyond the gates of the estate. Isolde agreed. As the car moved through familiar streets, she watched the world pass by. People walking dogs, shops opening for the day, life continuing at a pace untouched by their private struggles. It grounded her. Do you ever think about how easy it is to forget we're part of something larger? She asked. Alaric glanced at her. "I do now." She smiled faintly. When they returned home, Kaelin was waiting near the entryway, not standing guard, but standing ready. "I wanted to let you know," he said to Isolde, "that I'll be stepping back from my previous duties." She met his gaze. "Because you're no longer needed. Because the conditions have changed," he replied. "And because trust has been restored where it matters most." Alaric nodded in agreement. Kaelin inclined his head respectfully and stepped away, his role shifting once more. Isolde felt something settle inside her. This was the educational truth, clarifying now. When trust returns, control must loosen, or it becomes fear in disguise. That afternoon, Isolde spent time in the nursery again, but this time, she wasn't alone. Alaric joined her, sitting on the floor beside her as she arranged small details. "Do you feel ready?" he asked. She considered the question. "I feel aware." He smiled. "That's probably more honest than ready." They laughed quietly. As they worked together, Isolde noticed how natural it felt to share decisions now. There was no second guessing, no silent weighing of whether her opinion would be dismissed. This was what partnership looked like when it functioned well. Later, as dusk approached, Isolde felt a wave of tiredness settle into her bones. She rested on the couch, eyes half closed, while Alaric sat nearby, reading quietly. She listened to the sound of pages turning and felt something rare. Safety, not the kind built on secrecy, but the kind built on presence. She rested her hand over her belly, feeling a gentle movement beneath her palm. "You're going to grow up, seeing us talk," she whispered softly. "Even when it's hard." Alaric looked up. "And listen," he added. She smiled. That evening, Kaelin returned briefly to speak with them. "There's one thing left to say," he said. "About the promise I made." Isolde listened carefully. "I promised to protect what mattered most," he continued, "and that includes respecting when my role is no longer required." She nodded. "Thank you for knowing when to step back." He inclined his head once more. "That's part of protection, too." As he left, Isolde felt a quiet sense of completion, not of the story, but of a chapter within it. Later that night, as Isolde and Alaric sat together by the window, she spoke softly. "I don't want us to forget this," she said. "How easily silence can grow between good intentions." "We won't," he replied. "Not if we keep choosing awareness." This was the final lesson of this part. Awareness isn't about anticipating problems. It's about staying present when they appear. Isolde rested her head against his shoulder, feeling the steady reassurance of shared understanding. The secret had done its work. Now, it was time to move forward, not untouched, but wiser. The quiet that followed felt earned, not empty, not fragile, earned like the stillness after a long conversation where everything that needed to be said finally found its place. Isolde noticed it the next morning as she stood by the kitchen window, sunlight warming her face. There was no tension in her chest, no instinct to brace herself, just presence. She poured tea slowly, mindful of her body, of the life growing inside her, of the way her breath moved without effort. This new, not comfort exactly, clarity. Alaric joined her moments later, slipping an arm around her shoulders. He didn't speak right away. He didn't need to. They stood there together, watching the day begin. "I've been thinking," he said, finally, "about how easily good intentions can turn into distance." She nodded. "I think that's what surprised me the most. That love wasn't the problem. And yet, he said, it almost became collateral. They shared a quiet understanding. This was another educational truth, settling in gently. Love alone isn't enough. It must be paired with communication to remain healthy. Later that morning, Isolde received a message from a friend, someone she hadn't spoken to in weeks. "How are you, really?" She smiled at the question. "I'm learning," she typed back. And she meant it. The day unfolded without urgency. Isolde rested when she needed to, walked when she felt strong. Alaric worked nearby, never distant, always available. It was in these unremarkable moments that Isolde felt the greatest shift. She no longer felt watched. She felt accompanied. That afternoon, Kalen stopped by briefly, no longer as a guardian, but as a man closing a chapter of his own. "I wanted to wanna goodbye," he said. "Goodbye?" Isolde asked. "Not permanently," he clarified. "Just differently." She understood. "You did what you believed was right," she said. "That matters." He inclined his head. "So did you." There was no bitterness in the moment, only mutual respect. As he left, Isolde realized something important. Roles are meant to change when circumstances do. Holding on to them too long creates imbalance. That evening, Alaric suggested they eat inside, near the fireplace. The air was cool, the room warm, with soft light. "I want to make a commitment," he said suddenly. She looked up, curious. "Not a promise," he clarified. "A practice." She smiled. "Those tend to last longer." He returned the smile. "I want us to check in, not just when something feels wrong, but when things feel calm." She nodded. "Especially then." This was another lesson, one she felt deeply. Maintenance matters more than repair. As the fire crackled softly, Isolde leaned back, tired in the best way. Alaric adjusted the blanket over her without comment. She thought about the weeks she had spent questioning herself, doubting her instincts, wondering if she was asking for too much. She realized now that she hadn't been asking for too much. She'd been asking for partnership. That night, Isolde slept deeply. No dreams, no questions, just rest. Morning arrived gently, with birdsong and light filtering through the curtains. Isolde woke slowly, her body relaxed, her thoughts clear. She turned to Alaric, who was already awake, watching her. "What?" she asked softly. "I was just thinking," he said, "about how close I came to confusing protection with control." She reached for his hand. "And how close I came to confusing patience with silence." They smiled at each other. This was the heart of everything they had learned. Growth happens when both people are willing to reflect, not defend. As they rose together and prepared for the day, Isolde felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Confidence, not in circumstances, not in certainty, but in their ability to face whatever came next. Together. The secret that once hovered over the house had done more than create tension. It had revealed what needed to change. And now, with that change embraced, the future felt less like something to fear and more like something to welcome. Some truths don't arrive as revelations. They arrive as confirmations. That was how it felt for Isolde in the days that followed. Less like discovering something new, and more like finally seeing clearly what had been there all along. The house moved at an easier pace. Now, conversations flowed without hesitation. Doors remained open. Schedules were shared. Even small decisions were made together. Not out of obligation, but out of habit. It felt natural. And that, Isolde realized, was the real measure of change. She sat in the garden one afternoon, the sun warming her shoulders, when Alaric joined her with 2 cups of tea. "You've been quieter," he observed. "Not quieter," she replied thoughtfully. "More settled." He nodded. "Know that feeling." They sat side by side, watching leaves stir gently in the breeze. "I want to talk about something," Isolde said after a moment. "Anything. The way we handled the secret," she said. "Not just what it was, but how it changed us." He considered that carefully. "I think I learned that fear doesn't disappear when you ignore it," he said. "It just changes shape." She smiled faintly. "I learned that patience isn't the same as silence." They shared a knowing look. This was the educational truth emerging now. Growth isn't about avoiding mistakes. It's about understanding them before they harden into patterns. Later that evening, Isolde felt a subtle tightening in her abdomen. Nothing alarming, just a reminder that her body was working harder now. She rested on the couch, breathing slowly, listening to the steady rhythm of the house around her. Alaric noticed immediately. "Do you want me to call someone?" he asked. "No," she said gently. "I want you to sit with me." He did, without question. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. This moment, Isolde realized, was what she had missed most during his absence. Presence without problem solving. This was another lesson, unfolding quietly. Sometimes support means resisting the urge to fix and choosing to stay instead. Later that night, Kalen returned briefly to collect a few remaining items from his previous quarters. He moved through the house with quiet efficiency, his demeanor calm. Isolde encountered him near the entryway. "You're leaving tomorrow?" she asked. "Yes," he replied. "My role here is complete." She nodded. "You did what you believed was right." He met her gaze. "And you did what many don't." "What's that?" she asked. "You asked to be included," he said. "That takes courage." She smiled softly. "So does knowing when to step back." They shared a moment of mutual respect. No resentment, no regret. As Kalen left the room, Isolde felt a sense of closure, not just regarding the secret, but the chapter of uncertainty it represented. That night, Isolde and Alaric talked again, this time about the future. not plans, not schedules, values. I don't want us to fall back into old habits, Isolde said. Even good ones. Alaric nodded. Especially good ones. They're the hardest to question. They agreed on something simple but meaningful. They would check in, emotionally, before making decisions that affected both of them. This was the educational truth grounding the chapter. Shared values create resilience when circumstances change. As the days passed, Isolde felt a growing sense of confidence, not in certainty, but in communication. She spoke when something felt off. She rested when her body asked her to. She trusted herself without second-guessing. And Alaric listened. Not perfectly, but willingly. One evening, as they prepared for bed, Isolde paused by the mirror, studying her reflection. She looked different than she had weeks ago. Not because of pregnancy, but because of awareness. She felt rooted. I used to think strength meant enduring quietly, she said aloud. And now? Alaric asked. Now I know it means participating fully. He smiled. I'm glad you taught me that. As they settled into bed, Isolde rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. She felt safe, not because there were no risks, but because there were no lies. And that, she realized, was the true resolution of the secret. Not its exposure, but its integration into a healthier way of loving. Closure doesn't always arrive with certainty. Sometimes it arrives with acceptance. Isolde felt that acceptance settling in as the days moved forward, without incident. There were no sudden revelations, no dramatic confrontations, just a gradual return to equilibrium. Steady, grounded, real. She spent her mornings walking slowly through the garden, her movements deliberate, her breath calm. The tension she had once carried in her chest no longer followed her. In its place was something quieter. Confidence, not in outcomes, but in communication. Alaric accompanied her when he could. His presence no longer something she had to request or interpret. He shared updates, naturally, without prompting. It wasn't performative transparency. Habit. This was the educational truth becoming clear now. Healthy patterns feel effortless, not because they require no effort, but because they align with intention. One afternoon, Isolde received a call from her sister again. They spoke about the pregnancy, about emotions, about how relationships could shift under pressure. You sound different, her sister observed. I feel different, Isolde replied. I stopped pretending I was okay when I wasn't. That'll do it, her sister said with a soft laugh. The conversation left Isolde thoughtful. She realized how often people equated strength with endurance, and how rarely they equated it with honesty. Later that day, Isolde sat with Alaric in the study, the same room that had once felt off-limits, heavy with silence. Now it felt neutral, grounded. I avoided this room for weeks, she admitted. I know, Alaric said gently. I thought respecting boundaries meant staying away, she continued. But I see now that boundaries without dialogue, become barriers. He nodded. I should have invited you in. This was another lesson, unfolding naturally. Boundaries protect relationships, but only when both people understand them. That evening, as they prepared dinner together, Isolde moved carefully, aware of her body's limits. Alaric watched without hovering, offering support when she accepted it, stepping back when she didn't. It was a rhythm they had learned together. You're not fragile, he said quietly. You're just carrying more. She smiled. So are you. They laughed softly. That night, as they ate by candlelight, Isolde reflected on how much had changed, not in circumstance, but in approach. The secret had once felt like a wall. Now it felt like a lesson. This was the educational truth, anchoring the chapter. Difficult experiences don't weaken relationships when they're processed together. As bedtime approached, Isolde felt tired in a way that felt honest, not depleted, but full. She rested against Alaric, his arm steady around her. Do you regret how things unfolded? She asked. He considered the question. I regret the silence, he said, not the learning. She nodded. Me too. They sat quietly, letting the weight of those words settle. The house was peaceful. No guards, no secrets, no watchful eyes, just shared space and shared understanding. As Isolde drifted towards sleep, she felt a sense of closure, not because everything was perfect, but because nothing remained unspoken. The chapter that had begun with absence and uncertainty had ended with presence and clarity. And that, she realized, was the kind of ending that allowed a new beginning to form. Endings don't always announce themselves. Sometimes they arrive quietly, disguised as ordinary days that feel a little lighter than the ones before. Isolde noticed it in the way she woke that morning, without tension in her chest, without the instinct to brace herself for something unknown. The house felt familiar again, not because it hadn't changed, but because she had. She lay still for a moment, one hand resting over her belly, feeling a gentle shift beneath her palm. We made it, she whispered. Downstairs, the day unfolded with calm intention. Alaric prepared breakfast while Isolde sat nearby, offering commentary and the occasional instruction. There was laughter, unforced, easy. It struck her then how different this felt from weeks ago. Nah, louder, just steadier. This was the educational truth shaping the final chapter. Healing isn't dramatic. It's consistent. After breakfast, they sat together near the windows, sunlight filling the room. I've been thinking about what all of this taught me, Alaric said. She smiled. Have I? He turned toward her fully. I learned that love doesn't weaken when you share responsibility. It strengthens. She nodded, and I learned that asking for clarity isn't asking for too much. They sat with those truths, letting them settle. Later that morning, Isolde received a message confirming her next prenatal appointment. She showed it to Alaric, and without hesitation, he added it to his schedule. Together, he said simply. That word carried weight. As they prepared to leave the house, Isolde paused at the doorway. She glanced back, not with hesitation, but with gratitude. The house that once felt too quiet now felt balanced, not because it held no memories of uncertainty, but because those memories no longer defined it. At the appointment, Alaric stayed close, listening attentively, asking questions, offering his presence rather than control. Isolde noticed how naturally he deferred to her instincts about her body. Respect had replaced assumption. Another lesson confirmed itself. Partnership means trusting each other's expertise, especially when it comes to lived experience. When they returned home, Isolde felt pleasantly tired. She rested while Alaric took a call in another room. Open door, no lowered voice, no secrecy. Transparency had become habit. That afternoon, they walked slowly through the garden, one last time before the season changed. Leaves stirred gently in the breeze, the air crisp and calm. I used to think love meant protecting the people you care about from everything, Alaric said. And now? Isolde asked. And now I know it means standing beside them when things aren't easy. She smiled. That's the kind of love I want our child to grow up seeing. As evening approached, they sat together on the porch, watching the sky shift colors. Isolde rested against Alaric, her body tired but content. She reflected on the journey they'd taken, how absence had revealed gaps, how silence had created tension, and how truth had rebuilt trust. This was the final, educational truth of the story. Love lasts when people are willing to learn from discomfort instead of avoiding it. The secret that once hovered over their lives no longer held power, not because it never existed, but because it had been met with honesty, humility, and growth. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Isolde felt a deep sense of peace. Not perfection, peace, and that, she knew, was the truest ending she could have hoped for. The final chapter of this season didn't arrive with celebration. It arrived with understanding. Isolde woke that morning with a calm she hadn't known in months. Her body felt heavy in the way it should during this stage of pregnancy. No sharpness, no anxiety, just presence. She lay still for a moment, listening to the house breathe around her. There were no guarded steps in the hallway, no quiet tension in the walls, no unspoken weight hanging between rooms. Only life unfolding as it should. She rose slowly and made her way to the kitchen, where Alaric stood at the counter, preparing tea. "Good morning," he said, turning with a smile that felt unburdened. "Good morning," she replied. They stood together in comfortable silence, the kind built from shared effort rather than avoidance. "I was thinking," Isolde said after a moment, "about how close we came to misunderstanding each other." Alaric nodded, and how easily that could have become permanent. "But it didn't," she said, "because we stopped protecting each other from the truth," he replied, "and started protecting the relationship instead." She smiled. That was it. That was the lesson at the heart of everything they had lived through. Later that morning, Isolde sat in the nursery, rocking slowly. The room was finished now, not because it had been rushed to completion, but because it felt right. Alaric joined her, sitting on the floor nearby. "I want to tell our child this story one day," he said quietly. She looked at him. "Which part? All of it?" he replied, "especially the part where we learned how to listen." She nodded, touched. This was another truth, settling in gently. The stories we pass down shape how the next generation understands love. As the day unfolded, Isolde felt moments of tiredness, followed by moments of strength. She accepted both without judgment. Alaric noticed and adjusted naturally, offering help without hovering, stepping back without disengaging. They had learned the balance together. In the afternoon, a message arrived from Kaelin, wishing you both peace. Isolde smiled at the simplicity of it. She replied with equal grace, "Thank you for helping us find it." As evening approached, Isolde and Alaric sat together in the living room, hands intertwined, the quiet punctuated only by the soft ticking of a clock. "I used to think strength meant enduring alone," Isolde said. "And I used to think love meant carrying everything," Alaric replied. They exchanged a look that held months of learning. "Turns out," she said, "it means choosing each other, even when it's uncomfortable, and trusting that honesty won't break what's real," he added. They sat with those words, letting them settle into something permanent. Outside, the sky darkened slowly, the day ending without ceremony. Inside, something had already been completed. The secret had never been the enemy. Fear had been, and fear, once faced together, no longer held power. Isolde rested her hand over her belly, feeling a gentle movement beneath her palm. "You're coming into a home built on truth," she whispered. Alaric placed his hand over hers, and love that learned how to grow. The night wrapped around the house, softly, not hiding anything, not guarding anything, just holding what mattered. And in that stillness, Isolde understood the final lesson this story offered. Love isn't proven when everything is easy. It's proven when people choose honesty, patience, and partnership, especially when it's hard. The end of one chapter, the beginning of a stronger one. If this story moved you, take a moment to like it. It helps more people find stories that speak to real life. And tell me in the comments, what do you think is more important in love? Protection or honesty? If you want more stories that explore love, growth, and life lessons, subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson. Thank you for listening.